All right. Good morning, everybody. David Shapiro here. Sorry, it's been a little bit since my last update. I'm just not going to take too much time for this, but I just want to say, my burnout recovery continues, and it turns out that doubling down on gut health was the way to go. So I felt a little crappy there for a couple days. Some of the secondary effects, it's called a die-off reaction. But my numbers are moving in the right direction, and I feel better than I have in many, many years. So, with that being said, let's get right into today's episode. To provide a little bit of context, a little bit of framing for where I'm going to go, is that I have been talking to plenty of industry insiders as well as industry adjacent people. So I have been making use of this time as I'm working on wrapping up my book, The Great Decoupling. So this is about where it's going in the long run and how we can pivot. I'm not going to bore you with the details about the book, but I just wanted to provide some context that I'm talking to all kinds of industry insiders and I'm going to more conferences and that sort of thing. So what I'm sharing is not necessarily like predictions about the future like what I used to do, because that was me as an outsider kind of guessing. So what I'm here to tell you is what's actually coming down the pipeline in 2026. So first and foremost, on the technical front, the biggest change that's coming in 2026 is multimodal is going to become the default. So we already have where there's, image native understanding and some voice native, but video native is really what's coming. So this has been all but confirmed for Grok 5 and a handful of other models. So real-time video understanding and generation is definitely going to be a big thing. And that's going to make a lot of people sit up and take notice, because now you're no longer talking about just language. We've bootstrapped artificial intelligence with language. Turns out learning language first was the way to go, just because text data is easily tokenized. But now we're learning to just tokenize everything. Actually, Dylan over at Dylan Curious, he pointed this out to me over a year ago. He's like, there just seems to be some kind of magic in just tokenizing everything. So he was way ahead of the curve there, just in that very incisive observation. So that's going to continue. And the thing is, when you have that kind of expansion of capability inside, large multimodal models, as we probably should call them, although LLM has stuck. And the reason that I want to bring this up is because some people are still, saying, I had a friend reach out. He's like, I'm seeing all these videos of people saying that, LLMs can't scale to AGI or ASI, so it's all dead in the water. I'm like, no, there's nothing, there's no there. And the reason is because we haven't even finished figuring out what all we can tokenize, let alone all the algorithmic improvements and other scale improvements. So on a technical front, the most exciting thing that I expect that we'll see next year is video native models, which that's really cool. Next is going to be, benchmarks. Of course, benchmarks are continuing to saturate at an incremental level. But what I will add is that benchmarks are a proxy for real-world performance, but as we've seen with Grok, you can over-index and overfit to benchmarks. And that leaves you with a very weak model. So there is some secret sauce that other companies like Google and Anthropic and OpenAI understand about model quality that Grok just hasn't figured out yet. And that's not to say that Grok is useless. It does have its uses, but it is very clearly overfit to the benchmarks. So we're going to see more benchmarks, and the benchmarks that we do have are going to be incrementally more saturated. And the point there is that we're going to get to a tipping point. So this is what happens in all technologies. This is not just an artificial intelligence thing. But we get to a tipping point where suddenly the new technology is not just a nice, shiny toy, something to play with. It's like, oh, this is actually good. Not only is this is good enough to deploy and scale. So that's kind of where we've been at, where for certain tasks, language models have been getting to the point where it's like, this is no longer just a curiosity or a novelty. This is good enough for production. So we're going to continue to see that, but we're going to see it expanding in terms of the number of kinds of tasks that it is production ready for. So that's when, benchmarks are one thing, because what's possible in the lab is one thing, but what's possible in business, which is where you really move the needle for most people, that's a different thing. Now, the other technical front that we're going to see in 2026 is the world models and the interactive real-time models. So this is basically the game engines. We've already seen the first clues of this, mostly coming out of Google and DeepMind. But that's going to scale very rapidly because there's a lot of people that are saying, hey, you know what? If you can have a real-time video game engine and just wholesale replace your current, Unreal 5, there's a whole lot of money there. So there's a lot of potential for creative destruction. Now, I'm not saying that Google DeepMind is going to get into the video game engine field, and I'm not saying that Unreal is going to, or the Frostbite engine or whatever, that they're going to throw out their code base and switch to AI models next year. But what we probably will see is the toolkits being built, the baseline SDKs and those sorts of things. So I want to temper a little bit of the optimism and say that 2026 we're probably not seeing a fully deep neural network AI native game engine. But we're going to see the rudiments, and we're certainly probably going to have the first playable examples, the first MVPs or proofs of concept. But we're not going to see it scale up. You're probably not going to see something on Steam for sale that's like, this is 100% AI. We're just not there yet. But we're going to see that that's what's coming, and that's going to be really kind of on people's radar. Now, so that wraps it up for technically what's coming down the pipeline in 2026. And that's not 100% of everything. That's just what's top of mind for me based on the conversations I'm having. The next thing is business. So I think that the primary thing that's going to happen in 2026 for business is that a lot of businesses at all scales are going to sit up and say, wait, agents are actually good now. And that's going to be a combination of, one, just exposure, but number two, agents are going to continue to improve. So if you're in the AI agent building space, make sure you stay at the cutting edge, the bleeding edge, because I believe 2026 is going to be your year to shine. And what the reason that I'm confident saying this is because plenty of businesses are already deploying agents. But the thing is, what a business calls an agent is not necessarily something that's fully autonomous. It might just be automating one task rather than an entire value stream or workflow. Furthermore, because enterprises in particular are very, very risk averse, they want something that is very highly controlled and where you've got a transparency pane and where you've got logs and reversible decisions and all that kind of fun stuff. So many businesses, and this is not most, by the way, but many, more than one, and certainly pushing closer to 50% than you might think, are tinkering around with at least one use case for fully autonomous or semi-autonomous AI agents. And the areas that they're targeting are, number one, HR, and number two, legal. But then also every business also has some of their own bespoke kind of offerings. So whatever's particular to their industry, they're looking for AI agents to be a differentiating factor. So let's say, for instance, your business model has to do with pharmaceuticals. You might be trying to use AI agents to help, with research or regulatory paperwork or that sort of thing, because that's something that is particular to your industry and can be a differentiating factor. And so there's kind of two ways that agents are being deployed, which is one, that industry specific thing, and then the industry agnostic thing, which is HR and legal. Every business has HR and legal. So that's already happening, but when you look at the technical improvements that are coming down the pipeline, combined with the ongoing improvements in terms of the software architectures, the design patterns, the API best practices, and all that other fun stuff that's constantly maturing, we're going to get to the tipping point sometime during 2026 where many industries and enterprises sit up and take notice and say, agents are actually good now. Let's explore what else we can do with this. This has happened plenty of times throughout the last 2 decades in technology during my career, where there's a technology that is like, oh, that's cool, that's nice to have. So, the example that I'm most familiar with is VMware. When I first started, it was GSX, which was a supervisor that ran on top of Windows, and then they switched to ESX, and that was when it was a hypervisor, so it was a minimalized operating system that didn't take much resources and just ran, the containerized operating systems. And now containerization is, standard. So I was there at the very beginning. I'm an old guy now. I think I can qualify. And what I'm telling you right now is that AI agents are in the GSX kind of era, and that 2026 is going to be the equivalent of the ESX era. And if you don't understand what GSX and ESX are, that's perfectly fine. I'm a VMware nerd. But the point is it's going to get to a tipping point. Think of it as the difference between a BlackBerry and an iPhone. The BlackBerry was super popular for people that could afford it, but it wasn't anywhere near as useful as the iPhone. But then when the iPhone came out, smartphones were for everyone. So that's I think we're going to have the iPhone moment of agents during 2026. And I want to point out that at the end of 2024, I predicted that 2025 was going to be the year of the agent, because what I saw coming down the pipeline is that agents were not really even at MVP yet this time last year, 12 months ago. They were still very much hypothetical, but now we're learning the rules of the road and the best practices. So keep your eyes and ears open for agents, not just the technical advancements, but also the business use cases and the ROI and the risk management. Now, the next topic that I want to talk about is jobs, because this is one thing that people are always asking me, which is how hard, how fast, when are the jobs going away? And in one conversation that I had, something kind of crystallized for me, and that is that, right now unemployment is nominally good. Although when you look closer at the data, you see that like the gigification and the precarity is rising. So gig work is rising. 65 million Americans are freelance workers or gig workers, which is insane. The American dream does not include precarious work. The American dream was solid, reliable, full-time employment. And when fully a fifth of the population is precariously employed, that is not the American dream. So that's getting worse. Then you look at marginally attached workers and discouraged workers. Both of those are on the rise. Youth unemployment is on the rise. So even though top line unemployment is good, the rest of it is not looking as good. So when you look closer at the data, it's more alarming. Then you combine that with the fact that they're forecasting a recession within the next 12 to 18 months. Of course, people have been calling for that for a while. We were supposed to have a recession this year. But the insane investment in artificial intelligence driving the Magnificent Seven has prevented that, at least on the stock market. So people are saying, but there's a bubble. And the thing is, the companies are still profitable. So it's not there is some speculation driving up stock market prices. And I pointed out that like having a stock market pullback or a stock market correction, yes, that's to be expected. And some people see, that's a bubble. That's not what a bubble is. A bubble is when you have speculation built on nothing. But Microsoft and Google and Nvidia are all wildly profitable companies. So what you're seeing is some irrational exuberance around the hype and speculation, but it's not a house of cards. It's not built on sand. Now, with that being said, after you have a long stretch of all-time highs, which I think we're about 37 months into a bull market, and the historical average bull market is like 65 months or something like that. So we're a little bit past the halfway mark of a bull market. So you're going to see some corrections. You're going to see some pullbacks. And this is not financial advice, by the way. This is just my hypothesis based on all my reading. But at the end of that, so maybe within the next year or two or three, we're going to see a major recession. And there's going to be, of course, a lot of cooling off on the job market. And what we're probably going to see is more of what's the new normal, which is more jobless recoveries. Because what's going to happen in the next year or two is that AI is going to get better. Enterprise strategy and corporate adoption is going to get better. And so then when the stock market does have a major pullback, we have a recession, when interest rates and credit crunches and all that other stuff locks up, companies are going to shed a lot of employees to survive the recession or the pullback, whatever happens to come down the pipeline. And then when things loosen up, they're going to say, well, why don't, instead of hiring people back, we just deploy more AI and more agents? And we saw a very similar rapid technology adoption during the recession, and that was the adoption of remote work. So here's an example. I worked at Cisco Systems in the mid-20 teens, and one of the values of Cisco Systems was that you should be able to work anywhere at any time. And so guess what? We had WebEx accounts and we had at-home VPNs. So it was just really easy to work, to live and work as though you were in the office at all times. Even so, they wanted you to be in the office as much as possible just because of work culture and so on and so forth. But what happened with the recession, or sorry, not the recession, the pandemic, is that proved to every company you need to have the ability for employees to be just as effective at home as in the office. So there was a huge investment in things like WebEx. And of course, WebEx died because Cisco was resting on their laurels, and Zoom came in and ate their breakfast, right? They ate their lunch to say, hey, we can do remote conferencing and remote video better than WebEx. Great, go for it. And then, of course, bring your own device and other cloud, thin app virtualizations. All that kind of stuff took off because of the pandemic. What I'm here to say is that the next time we have a recession or a depression and companies are forced to lay off a bunch of employees, they're going to do the same thing, but they're going to say, how can we get this work done without human bodies? And that's when the surge of adoption of AI agents is going to really ramp up. That's my current prediction, is that the next time we have a jobless recovery, that's going to prove to a lot of business leaders, AI agents are the way to go. So just keep your mind out, keep that in kind of your back burner. Let that ferment in your mind and just pay attention to the trends. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is humanoid robots. So a year ago, almost a year ago today, maybe December last year was when I made that prediction that 2026 was going to be the year of the robot. Now, that holds true, and what we're already seeing kind of the first clues with all the huge number of robots being released, America, China, even some in Europe and Japan, where humanoid robots are really getting close to product market fit. And so product market fit is different from an MVP or a POC. What we've been seeing for the last couple of years is proof of concept. Whenever Tesla Optimus has walked their robot out to say, hey, look, it's walking on its own, or when Boston Dynamics shows that, it can do backflips and can do some parkour, that's a proof of concept. And so then this year, 2025, what we saw was MVP, so minimum viable product. That is the first iteration of something that is useful. It's not necessarily good yet, but we hit humanoid robot MVP this year. And so next year, what we're hitting is product market fit, where one of these guys, I don't know who it's going to be, maybe it's Figure, maybe it's Boston Dynamics, maybe it's one of the Chinese companies like Unitree. One of these companies is going to hit product market fit where the capabilities of the robot are good enough to justify the price tag and demand will surge. Now, of course, everyone who's building robots is counting on this. Everyone who's building robots sees that this is a future $100 trillion industry and they want to be a first mover. Now, the fact that we have a lot more than just one first mover here, we've got Tesla Optimus, we've got Figure, we've got Atlas, we've got Unitree, and that's just the top 4 off the top of my head. There's a whole bunch of other ones out there. There's more than a dozen. Hell, but right now there's probably more than 2 or 3 dozen companies trying to enter that robotic market space. So we're going to hit product market fit next year. Now, just because you hit product market fit doesn't mean that that's the final form. It doesn't mean that it's the best version. That just means that you can justify the price tag and that it is suddenly good enough that demand scales. So that's what I expect to happen by the end of 2026. By this time next year, we will have hit product market fit for humanoid robots. Now, does that mean that we're going to have shortages because of, the actuators and the onboard computers? Who knows? So here's a bonus. Here's a bonus topic that I didn't plan on talking about, but I've got some time left on the recording. And that is not just the AI bubble, but, the shortages. So I asked a question on Twitter. And of course, I know Twitter is not the best source of information, but I also asked AIs and other people. But I asked, is anyone genuinely actually concerned about, not having enough power or chips for artificial intelligence? And by and large, the consensus is, yes, there might be a squeeze over the next 1 to 3 years. And the reason is just because power grids take time to adapt. It takes time to install solar. If you're going to build nuclear, that takes even longer. But what we're seeing is a rise in co-location of power. So whether that's natural gas, whether it's solar, whether it's building data centers near existing nuclear power plants, as Microsoft is doing, there's all kinds of ways around that power constraint. So even if the grid is outdated, where there's a will, there's a way. If you need the juice, someone can produce it. So that is probably the easier problem to solve. Now, ramping up chip production is also very hard because building chip fabs takes a while. And it's due to how delicate the process is, because you need ultra pure water. Just as step one, if you don't have a source of ultra pure water, you don't have a chip fab. Sight unseen, full stop. So, that's one of the things. And then also, however, just because it takes time to spin up new chip fabs, that doesn't mean that existing chip fabs aren't also churning out chips. So, even if there is a shortage, NVIDIA is still churning out millions of GPUs a year. So yes, there is hypothetically a little bit of a squeeze, but that doesn't mean that we're going to run out of AI. It doesn't mean that we're going to shut down data centers. It means that over the next 1 to 3 years, electricity prices near data centers are going to go up by 20%, which, I'm not going to beat around the bush. That sucks for people who live near data centers. But at the same time, that is a price signal. Both of these are price signals. And so we see other entrants entering, particularly in the chip space, where Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, and others, ARM, are all competing. And, we even have Grok, the GRQ, and others entering into this space because they're like, hey, there is such a huge demand for chips that it is now cost effective to build a new startup or to pivot and produce more GPUs and TPUs. So while there is a short-term squeeze, and I'm saying squeeze, not shortage, because again, it's not like we're going to run out of power or run out of chips. So there's a short-term squeeze on those two resources, but the price signal is very clear and the market is already pivoting. So whatever squeeze we have, whatever short-term squeeze we have, is going to be erased, and it's just going to fade into the background and people aren't going to talk about it anymore. Now, that's my opinion. People are welcome to disagree. But when you look at the amount of investment going into power generation and chip production, where money flows, problems are soon solved. So with that being said, thanks for listening, and I'll check you all next time. Take care.